Good morning to one and all. Take your church hymnals, turn to page 137. As we stand and sing verses 1 and 4, we'll sing at Acapulco this morning because we do not have a piano player. So I hope I don't start this too low or too high. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. Page 137. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word, just to rest upon his promise, just to know, thus saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I've proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. I'm so glad I've learned to trust thee, precious Jesus, Savior, friend. And I know that thou art with me, wilt be with me to the end. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I've proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. Brother Mike, take us, Lord, in prayer this morning.
Most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for being in your house this morning. Another day, another privilege it is to come and settle together and worship you in spirit and in truth. We just ask, Lord, the blessings be upon this service. Bless the songs, the testimonies. Pray you bless the teaching of your word, Lord, today. Bless all the teachers. Give remembrance of all they studied, knowing that the Spirit help, Lord, each and every one of us to open our ears, our minds, and our hearts. We be receptive to your word. We apply it to our hearts and learn more about you, Lord, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. You may be seated. Might be a little few in number this morning, but we are in the majority because the Lord is here this morning. So that makes it a very great place to be. Any announcements just before we go to our Sunday school classes? Listen to your teachers, okay? Take notes if you will. There will not be a test later, but please take notes if you would like to do that. And that way you can take them home and study them. Does that make sense? Okay, you're dismissed.
Good morning. Guess we're going to continue with David in our studies this morning and Samuel. Ask Brother Bill Rogers if he would open us with prayer, if we would.
Father, we're thankful for this opportunity to gather together again, and we ask that you be each one as many of your business to be here this morning. Bless us, bless our teacher, bless everyone that's here, Father. We might grow closer to you. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right, like I said, good morning. Today's lesson, 2 Kings, 1 Kingdom. If you read the end of 1 Samuel, you find out that Saul has died or been killed. Kind of a strange death, the way it happened. Actually, David, if we go back there, David has actually went over and joined the Philistines. He's over in Philistia. They give him, one of the kings over there found favor with him, and he is over there with the Philistines. And actually, when they start to go to battle with King Saul, the Philistines, David was there at first, and a lot of the Philistine princes and stuff said, no way, we're not going to let him go to battle with us. We're afraid he'll turn his allegiance back to Saul and kill us, you know. And David was in the rearward part of the armies there. So David turned back and went back to Ziklag, I guess where he'd been staying at, the city or whatever. And then the battle went on, and Saul was shot with arrows, I guess, and was about to die, was mortally wounded, I guess we'd call it. But anyways, he asked his armor bearer to kill him, and his armor bearer refused. He said, no, I can't do that. So Saul fell on his own sword, killed himself, basically. But afterwards, the Philistines, they took his armor after they'd finished the battle. They found him and his and Saul's sons, and they destroyed their bodies, kind of cut their heads off, took their armor, and put it in, hung it in their cities for like a trophy type thing. Which you know, it's kind of a cruel time. You know, a lot of killing, executing, or whatever, fighting with swords and such. But anyways, this is what they did with Saul's body, which was kind of a disgrace thing or whatever. But Saul had been, before his battle, he'd been actually consulting. He'd asked God about, or tried to ask God about what he needed to do and things, but he didn't get any answers. So he went to a witch in Endor, the witch, and asked her if she could find out what he was supposed to do or whatever. And I don't think she gave him too good a news or whatever. Anyway, so Saul was killed, hung, and so afterwards, like I said, David wasn't involved in this battle when Saul was killed, but he went back to his town that he'd been living there, and actually his two wives, that's where we start out here in chapter 2. This is after Saul's death. It says, chapter 2, verse 1, and it came to pass after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said unto him, go up. And David said, whither shall I go? And he said, unto Hebron. Well, David in the back in 1 Samuel, when he would consulted or wanted to know what the Lord's will was, it says, he said he called for an ephod. Anybody know what an ephod is? It's kind of a vest, like a apron type thing they wore. Had, he said it's a sacred vestment, specifically a linen apron worn by the high priest and other priests. It was a key part of their official attire, often associated with priestly divination and oracular practices. The ephod was made of fine linen, embroidered with colors. Its two pieces were joined together over the shoulders with clasps and buckles, often of precious stones. They all.
I was asked when they were putting the new pope in. Mike's mentioned that 2 or 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people that ask me, why all the glitz and the glamour, and why, why do the Catholics wear this apparel? Is that scriptural? And I said, absolutely.
Right.
Go all the way back, and you can see that it was very important how the priests adorned themselves when they went into the temple.
Mm-hmm. Says the ephod was also a symbol of authority and a reminder of the priest's role in mediating between God and the people. So it was actually something very sacred they wore, and David had actually called for this when he was asking for God's guidance on where to go and how to act when he was fleeing from Saul and things. And but then, like I said, Saul, he didn't get an answer from the Lord, so he went and inquired of a witch, or a woman of, spirit things where she, would summons people from the dead, supposedly, and things. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, where should he go? Out of the cities of Judah. And the Lord said to him, go up. And David said, whither shall I go? And he said, unto Hebron. So verse 2 says, so David went up thither with his two wives. He had two wives at this time, Ahinoam the Jezreelite and Abigail, Nabal's wife of the Carmelite. And his men were with him, and David did David bring up every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul. So David, we know David was already anointed king spiritually, or by Samuel, by God. God actually had chosen David, out of this lineage, and Samuel anointed him as king. But it was kind of kept secret, wasn't really publicized. You already had a king, King Saul. So if you have another person that you've anointed king, kind of makes a big conflict. Say, here's my replacement. That's just like when Jesus was born. And Herod, he wanted to go kill all the babies because he didn't want a new king. He didn't want someone questioning his authority or taking over for him. So it says David knew that he would be the next king over Israel. Yet when he learned that Saul's death, his first concern was to know the will of the Lord. 2 questions were asked. So David was still was over with the Philistines at this time, but he asked of the Lord, and the Lord told him to go over to Hebron, which is in Judah. And like I said, these men of Judah, they anointed him king over Judah, which it was a natural anointing. It wasn't, I'll say, of God like Samuel was. Because Samuel was, Samuel was a priest. He was one of God's messengers, and so Samuel had anointed him as king. But the men of Judah anointed him. says it goes into the city of Judah, and whither shall I go up? To the first question, the answer was affirmative, to go, and the second answer was Hebron. Some may be surprised that David's countrymen, who had earlier expressed such love and admonition for him, extended no immediate invitation. See, the other half of Israel, they really didn't accept David as the king because he'd went over to the Philistines, and they doubted, where Saul was trying to kill him, he had actually had to flee, says, we are certainly aware of the fact that these men of Judah were not only of David's tribe, but surely felt that they had been divinely selected as the future king. They seemed to be among those who had kept up with David and his activities while he was running for his life from Saul. And 2, they had very recently received gifts from him in recognition of their kindness. So these men also, David, after he found out what had happened to Saul, where they took Saul and desecrated his body basically and hung him up as a trophy. These other men had went from Jabesh Gilead. They went and more or less rescued Saul's body and took it back and buried it, and did it more of a traditional type, I guess maybe. Well, it wasn't really traditional. They said they burned the body, but that was because of the decay and things of the flesh where they'd hung it up. They took care of it as best they could. Usually they would probably in the old Bible they'd mummify it, maybe wrap it up, like they did, like Lazarus or something. But this was after it had been desecrated. So they took his body, buried it, and David was very appreciative of this because he knew Saul was the anointed, and so he sent them gifts and and things of that nature. So in verse 5 says, this is David's character demonstrated. It says, and David sent messengers unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said unto them, Blessed be ye of the Lord, that ye have showed this kindness unto your Lord, even unto Saul, and have buried him. And now the Lord show kindness and truth unto you, and I will also requite you this kindness, because ye have done this thing. Therefore, now let your hands be strengthened, and be you valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah have anointed me king over them. So David is king over Judah now, and he sent gifts to these men that had taken care of Saul's body. So next we move on to another funny name here, Ishbosheth, the king of Israel. It says Abner, which is the captain of Saul's army, he's going to anoint Ishbosheth, which is one of Saul's youngest son, I guess. Saul's other sons were killed in the battle, Jonathan and his other sons were killed in the battle. It says, but Abner, the son of Ner, captain, as verse 8, captain of Saul's host, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and made him king over Gilead, and over Asherites, Jezreel, and over Ephraim, and over Benjamin, and over all Israel. So we've got, this is where we start to get our conflict here. We got two kings now. We got king of Judah, king over the other tribes of Israel. So we've got a divided kingdom here. What usually happens when we have a divided kingdom, just like the North and the South in the United States, we got a civil war. You know, we got some of the tribes, they wanted to keep their man as the king, and Judah wanted David as king, which we know God actually had the plan for David to be the king. So we definitely have a civil war here, very bloody. But I don't know if this was back before this or not, but there was a man came out of the other camp and came to David, and he told David of the story of Saul being killed. He said, David asked him, how do you know Saul and Jonathan and them are dead? He said, I was there, I was following, and he actually told David that he was the one that executed Saul. Yeah. And David was kind of upset with that. And David actually had him more or less executed then because he'd killed God's anointed. He said, that may be where we get the phrase, don't kill the messenger. This fellow brought a message, but I think he didn't tell the truth. He told a lie that he wanted to actually, lift himself up or whatever. But he had some articles of Saul's, but David said that wasn't the right thing to do. He says, by your own mouth it betrays you. And he
Expected a reward.
Yeah, he was expecting a reward. He wanted to be exalted or maybe put in a place of power with David being the king. And David said, well, that's not what's going to happen. He said, you've by your own mouth, you've admitted that you did this. You killed, one of God's anointed, which Saul was still the anointed king at that point in time. He had been anointed. So he actually, this man was actually killed also. So, like I said, that might be where we get the message, or the saying, don't kill the messenger, which that's what this fellow was. He came out, tried to give a message, but I'm not sure, I don't think it was true. Which, back in 1 Samuel, it tells how Saul died. Saul was mortally wounded. The Philistines had shot him with arrows and things, and he was at the point of death. He asked his armor bearer to go ahead and finish him off, but his armor bearer refused to do it. He wouldn't do it. So the Bible says he actually fell on his own sword. His own sword fell on it, to kill himself, basically. All right. The kingdom divided. Verse 10. Let's go on to verse 10. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years, but the house of Judah followed David. So this is where we have our divided kingdom. And the time that David was king in Hebron was over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. It says here we discover how the divided kingdom truly was. Scripture testifies Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and reigned 2 years, but the house of Judah followed David. Those words are paramount for this passage. The house of Judah recognized and followed Israel's rightful king. David, the house of Judah, committed themselves to follow God's man over against the people of Israel. Instead of following the true king, Israel subjected themselves to the kingship of Ishbosheth. That's a mouthful. Although Israel rejected its rightful king, God would use this season to bring about his perfect will for his people. Soon David would be king over all Israel, bringing about restoration and peace to a once divided land. All right, it says the next part here we're moving into is the war for a united kingdom. The first battle in the war of attrition, verses 12 through 17. It says, and Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met together by the pool of Gibeon, and they sat down the one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said unto Joab, let the young men now arise and play before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Well, I mean, he said let them arise and play, but really what he meant was let's have a conflict here. Let's let, you pick 12 of your men, and we'll get 12 of our men, and we'll let them go out here in the pool and have a battle, see who wins. Kind of a thing, I seen it on a movie once where they did a similar type thing where, they pick out their strongest guy, just like the Philistines did with Goliath. They said, bring out your strongest man, we'll let him fight, and whoever wins will be your servants, just like when David killed Goliath. So that was kind of, I think, what they were planning on doing here, but it kind of doesn't go that way. So he said, let the young men play, and said, then there arose and went over by number 12 of Benjamin, which pertaineth to Ishbosheth and the son of Saul, and the 12 of the servants of David. And they caught every one his fellow by the head, and thrust his sword at his fellow's side. So they fell down together. Wherefore that place was called Helkath Hazarim, which is in Gibeon. And there was a very sore battle that day, and Abner was beaten, and the men of Israel before the servants of David. So it said there was 12 of each of them went into this little mini battle, we'll say, and they said they all died. Every one of them. Like they matched up, one-on-one, I guess, and each one of them killed each other with swords. Makes it kind of a draw in that sense. But then I guess a battle pursued or ensued afterwards, because there was no true winner at that point in time. Said, but at this point in history, Abner evidently felt that his forces were strong enough to take on the army of David. So he marched them to Gibeon in the territory of Benjamin. Joab, leader of David's forces, went to Gibeon and his men in this place, and there was a large pool, 120 feet by 100 feet. Opposing forces were on either side of the pool. Abner suggested that the struggle be decided between a few men, and Joab was readily accepted the proposal. Although Abner said, let the young men now arise and play, the word play had nothing to do with the contest. It was a life or death struggle by the 12 men, and this was representative combat, they called it. The procedure, the outcome, show how evenly matched these 24 men were. In all the history of the world, one is caused to wonder if any similar contest or match ever ended in such a tie or a draw. Actually, each one killed his partner while he was being killed. So really, nothing was decided by this terrible loss of 24 strong soldiers. The place where this occurred is called Helkath Hazarim, which means the field of strong men. It says, just after the tragic deaths of the 24 strong men, there was a very sore battle that day. This is in verse 17. As the 12 representatives reached no decision, the opposing forces immediately attacked each other. We do not know the number of men with Abner or with Joab, and we only know that Joab's forces came out on top. It's David's army. David's side lost 19 men, and Israel's side lost 360 men, which that's a pretty lopsided battle. I mean, I think any army, if they went into a battle and they said, you're going to kill 360 of your enemies, you're going to lose 19 men, which, that's 19 men, that would fight, maybe for the right, we'll say, but that was the number or the ratio of loss versus, how many men were killed. It says, as we look at this history of the two sides, this battle marked a turning point in the struggle. So it says David's army kept getting stronger, and Ishbosheth, or Abner's army, army that he led, kept getting weaker. This is definitely a sign, just like in most of the other struggles in the Bible, the ones that God was with them, usually they sustained very little or no loss, and the other armies that were fighting against God's people usually were totally destroyed most of the time, as long as they were in God's will. But just like Saul, he consulted a witch. He was definitely not following God's will, when he was at that point in time when he was killed. It says a personal side to it national tragedy, verses 18 through 23. And there were three sons of Zeruiah there, Joab and Abishai and Ashiel. And Ashiel was light of foot as a wild roe. I guess he was a pretty fast runner, which I guess was a pretty good attribute in this point in time, because most of the things were hand-to-hand combat. Being fast or quick on your feet was a pretty good attribute, maybe even more than brute strength, because, they could run and catch up to someone, even though they were very strong. Someone's quick and agile, say, maybe would have an advantage over someone that was strong. Let me see. And Ashiel pursued after Abner. So this is one of Joab's, one of Zeruiah's sons, which were three here. He was the youngest, I think, or he was light of foot. He pursued after Abner, and in going, he turned not to the right hand nor to the left from following Abner. Then Abner looked behind him and said, Art thou Ashiel? And he answered, I am. And Abner said unto him, Turn thee aside to thy right hand or thy left, and lay thee hold on one of the young men, and take this his armor. But Ashiel would not turn aside from following of him. So this Ashiel, he was wanting to take Abner's armor. He was wanting to slay him and take his armor. It'd be very prestigious, I guess, to kill the captain of the other army. It's more of a pride type thing, I think, than anything. But Ashiel told him, Abner told him, said, I'm a little too strong for you. So I think that's what he was conveying anyways. He said, this is not too much of a fair fight. But Ashiel would not turn aside from following him. And Abner said again, he said, Turn aside from following me. Wherefore should I smite thee to the ground? How then should I hold up my face to Joab thy brother? Howbeit he refused to turn aside. Wherefore Abner, with the hinder end of his spear, smote him under the fifth rib, that the spear came out behind him. And he fell down there, and he died in the same place. And it came to pass that as many as came to the place where Ashiel fell down and died, they stood still. So this Ashiel, Abner warned him, we'll say, 2 or 3 times, said, stop following me. You need to go over here and get one of these weaker soldiers if you want to capture, or if you want a trophy, we'll say, of some armor. He said, you're barking up the wrong tree here. I'm way too strong for you. Go over there and fight. And he wouldn't have none of it, so I guess Abner he said he hit him with the back part of his spear. It's kind of it would take an awfully strong blow, seems like. You got spears, you got a pointy end, which is the fighting end, and then the back end, he took it and thrust it through him, I guess, through his stomach. In the Bible, almost any kind of a stomach wound is usually fatal. It's just like cowboys in the westerns. If they wanted to give a cowboy a slow death, they'd shoot him in the stomach, because it's very, very difficult to recover from it, I guess, to slow death usually. But he thrust this spear plumb through him, so he died rather quickly, I would think. Probably bled out really fast. Says, it is interesting to note the writer of 2 Samuel does not describe the bigger struggle in detail. However, the writer concentrates on an episode involving Abner and Ashiel, because the final results eventually would be the closing out of the northern kingdom. In David's army, there were 3 brothers. They were the sons of David's sister, Zeruiah. And Joab was the commander of David's army. Ashiel was a very heroic leader of the 30 warriors. That's in 2 Samuel. And Ashiel was a member of that group. Ashiel was a great runner. He is described as light of foot, as a wild roe. He ran after Abner, perhaps hoping to win a personal victory over him, being able to add another suit of armor to his collection of trophies. After looking back to see who was pursuing him, Abner thought that he recognized Ashiel, and after determining the true identity, begged him to lay hold on a younger, perhaps weaker soldier. Abner was aware of his own personal physical superiority over Ashiel. Abner was not motivated by a desire to spare Ashiel, but wanted to avoid revenge from the more skillful hand of Joab. Twice Abner practically begged him to turn aside, but he refused. When it says that someone was smote under the fifth rib, it simply means the person was smitten in the abdomen or the stomach. Also, the butt of the spear was used. It went completely through Ashiel, and he died. And this was the beginning of the personal bad blood between Abner, the captain of Ishbosheth's forces, and Joab, captain of David's forces. So this, after he killed one of Joab's brothers, he definitely would bring up a personal vendetta or a personal revenge type thing against Abner, and Abner, I guess he had a fear maybe of Joab. He knew Joab was a stronger, more mighty soldier, we'll say, and he didn't really want to kill his younger, smaller brother, but he did anyways. It says the battle ended, but the war continues, verses 24 through 32. It said Joab also and Abishai pursued after Abner, and the sun went down when they were come to the hill of Ammah, and lieth there before Giah, by the way of the wilderness of Gibeon. And the children of Benjamin gathered themselves together after Abner, and became one troop, and stood at the top of an hill. Then Abner called to Joab and said, Shall the sword devour forever? Knowest thou not that it will be bitterness in the latter end? How long shall it be then ere thou bid the people return from following their brethren? And Joab said, As God liveth, unless thou hadst spoken, surely then in the morning the people had gone up every one from following his brother. So, these are all Israelites, although they're divided, and there's a civil war right now. The Civil War in the United States, it was pretty bad too. You had brothers against brothers at certain times, maybe a brother against a father. They was relatives. They were from different tribes, we'll say, but they are still brethren, basically. So this was a pretty bad battle as far as a civil war type thing. It says, So Joab blew a trumpet, and all the people stood still and pursued after Israel no more, neither fought they any more. And Abner and his men walked all that night through the plain and passed over Jordan and went through all Bithron, and they came to Mahanaim. And Joab returned from following Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, there lacked of David's servant 19 men and Ashiel. But the servant of David had smitten of Benjamin and Abner's men, so that there were 360 men, or 360 men died. And they took up Ashiel and buried him in the sepulchre of his father, which was in Bethlehem. And Joab and his men went all night, and they came to Hebron at break of day. So this is after this battle, which, Abner's men lost 360. David's men were, 19, which is plus the brother of Joab, which is a pretty big discrepancy in men there. Says, so Abner actually had called for maybe a ceasefire. Hey, let's have a ceasefire here. Let's quit fighting. He says, all we're doing is killing each other. Basically, so all of Israel as a total was just getting weaker and weaker. In a sense, you lost 360 fighting men, and Joab's men, he lost 19. So you've lost nearly 400 men in this battle. All right, so Joab blew a trumpet. All the people stood still. It was a call for the soldiers to disperse and go home. The statement, neither fought they anymore, means that the final battle in this present conflict had ended. This campaign was now ended. Joab's men marched all night and reached Hebron, 25 miles away, near daybreak. Also on the way, they laid the body of Ashiel to rest in the family sepulchre at Bethlehem. In no way was this the end of the conflict between the two kingdoms. The first verse of the chapter 3 says, Now there was long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. This may have been irregular war without much bloodshed. No doubt many towns were pillaged and many homes burned, followed by heartache, heartbreak, and despair. Civil war is the very worst kind of war. It is clear that time was working on David's behalf. David was a good man. He was not vindictive by nature. He had been good to King Saul and King Saul's household. He was wise, tolerant, and kind. He also had much more charisma than Ishbosheth. And it seems, on the other hand, that Ishbosheth was both weak and incompetent. Then more and more people realized that David was the divinely appointed king. They may have even learned that Samuel had anointed him many years before the death of Saul. David was patient and willing to wait on God's timing. It says, as far back as the eve of Saul's last battle, there is an action of an important accession to David as the tribe of Manasseh, 1 Chronicles. There's also further mention to continued success to him day by day, and as a result of this constant shift, David's house grew stronger and Saul's house grew weaker. So we had this, the war for a united kingdom. Actually, later on, I don't know if it's maybe on in the next verse, but next chapter or so, Joab, they actually did catch up to Abner and actually slew him later on in the chapters. Before see, our lesson objectives was to understand that God's will cannot be changed by force. So David had been anointed king by God, when Samuel had anointed him. And even though Abner tried to more or less take over the kingdom by force, with his army and anoint Ishbosheth as king, it didn't work because that wasn't God's will. God hadn't anointed him. And the next objective was to be moved to appreciate devotion to God's anointed, whether we find it. So David, he actually honored Saul in a way because he knew Saul was the anointed. And that's why David fled instead of trying to kill Saul. And we know in several instances there, David, when he snuck into the camp, he took Saul's personal belongings there. He was right there beside Saul. He could have killed him, very easily, and said, "Hey, I'm anointed king," and now Saul's dead. And then again, I think Saul was in a cave. David there, he could have killed him there. He had several opportunities, and he actually had left Saul alone and not taken Saul's life because Saul was the anointed of God. He was anointed to be king back at a younger age. I know Saul was a very large man. He stood head and shoulders above the other men. He was a good king for a long time, and then things kind of went the wrong way for him. Let me see. To resolutely follow God's will no matter what the opposition. So David, even though David had went over and more or less joined up with the Philistines for a while, he was not in the battle against Saul when Saul was killed, and he was very upset. They said they mourned for Saul and Jonathan. Jonathan was his best friend. He was very close to Jonathan, and even though more or less he was on the opposite side of the battle, he definitely was there. He was there at the where Saul was killed, but the men of the Philistines, they were pretty upset. They didn't like him being there because they knew he had served Saul. He was Saul's servant. They said maybe he'll have a change of heart halfway through the battle and start killing us instead of killing Saul's people. So that's David didn't get involved in that. So he returned back to his homeland, or back to the city that he'd been more or less appointed to live in there at Ziklag, I think it was. But when he got back there, the Amalekites had taken his wives and burned the city and took all of his possessions. And there again, David, he consulted God on what he should do. What should he do? He wanted to know God's will, and God told him, said he got a definite answer that he should follow after and rescue his wives, and he did that. By following God's will, he said everything was recovered. His wives were recovered, and all of his possessions, and all the other men that was with him all their possessions. It's kind of a strange part of the story. I guess he had like 600 men. They were pursuing after the Amalekites, and 200 of them were too weak to continue, I guess, so they stayed back. And so he went ahead and took 400 men, and they chased and pursued after them, rescued their wives and all their possessions, and brought them back. And then when it's time to divide up the spoils, which that's part of the war thing, they would always divide up the spoils, the livestock, maybe the clothing, a lot of their things like that, their armor and things like that, they divided up, maybe their weapons too, their swords and spears, and, they divided up their spoils. And the 400 men that went with him said you shouldn't give them 200 men anything, because they were lazy and they laid back. They weren't strong enough to fight. But David said not so. He said, we're going to divide it up equally. Everyone's getting their share of this, of the spoils, which they said that was a trait that continued on with the Israelites after, with David and with the men. They always divided up everything equally. They didn't try to make a difference in it just because maybe a few of them had went a little farther or been a little more devoted, we'll say. They all got the same reward, we'll say. I think next week is a new day for Israel, so I think Ed will be back next week. You won't have to listen to my babbling too much.